Okay.
So when I read the book, okay, it's for a younger audience. Adults can relate to it, enjoy it as well,
Hmm.
as is the case with all children's literature. Um, I had some reservations about the ending. We don't see a reunification of the family, and
Yeah.
that kind of leaves a kasak in the reader.
Yeah.
So how is this resolved? So can you speak a
Yeah.
little to that? So what's in your
Right.
mind when you make that choice?
Well, I think that it's not a conscious necessarily. I'm not a writer who is. I don't plot everything out before, so I just.
Mhm.
But I think going back to your question is very interesting because it invites us to think about form and
Mhm.
expectations of form. So the
Mhm.
novel in particular is a new form in South Asia, right? So the dominant storytelling forms in our part of the world have been things like Angoli or the short story, right? Novel यहाँ बाद में आई थी. Or initially it was very much the preserve of the aristocratic elite who had, educations that
Mhm.
enabled them to have access to literature from other parts of the world and then replicated that, right?
But
Uh,
what about
the
Afsana?
new form.
Afsana is
So I
not
think it's
similar.
Pakistani. I don't know if it's that similar. I think that the indigenous storytelling forms were
Mm.
very much rooted in readers' expectations. So they
Mm.
were closer to theater in that you had to satisfy your audience, right?
Mm.
You had to satisfy your audience. वरना आपका काम पढ़ता नहीं, कोई सुनता नहीं, कोई जाता नहीं. ठीक है? The novel in itself, the English language novel, I think
Mm.
is something different because it is very much, it started as a preserve of the elite, which is people who could afford to indulge in it, right?
Mm.
People who didn't necessarily have to be dependent on the vagaries of the market. यानी कि कोई पढ़े नहीं तो कोई मसला नहीं है because हम अमीर डैड लोग हैं हम we don't have to worry कि हमारा खाना
Right.
कहाँ से आएगा etc
Yeah.
etc. So I think that gave me a kind of freedom, the form itself, that I did not feel the expectations that I might feel. The beauty of having a book that then transcends the readers that you initially meant it for is
Mm.
that sometimes then those two things meet each other. Readers who have more traditional expectations of the novel form, and people like me who think, well, what is a novel? I mean, it's an
Mm.
evolving form constantly, and in a way, it is a form that pretty much reflects the moment in time in which the story is being written. And
Mm.
so, I would invite you to think about Balochistan itself. Is there ever a resolution? Can there ever be a resolution?
Mm.
I mean, it is
Yeah.
kind of it is a dream that we
Yeah.
can visit it in our dreams and in our imagination,
Yeah.
but beyond that,
Yeah.
we have
That's
no agency there.
That's an interesting point, and all these things go into the making of a writer. So, Shandana,
Yeah.
that takes us to the next discussion point. What
Yeah.
for you? What would you say went into the making of you being a writer?
Ooh. Yeah.
I
So
am a
I don't know how
writer
to answer that question.
because
I uh, I don't know. I think
I mean
so.
we know that.
Why I
Yeah, sorry. Go on, Shandana.
so I used to say that becoming a writer is a process of explaining oneself to oneself. And I still believe that is true. I think that people who don't understand the world as it presents itself are driven to stories because they need stories to help them understand why the world is the way it is and how they belong or don't belong in it. So I
Mm.
think that storytelling is a kind of healing and it's a search for meaning. And I think I became a writer because, well, I can't tell you why I became a writer, but I always knew that I was a storyteller. And from a very young age, I knew I was a storyteller.
Mm.
But I don't think that's true of most people. I mean, I know I've met a lot of young writers now, and they are so corporate in their approach to it. I mean, they see it as a career path. In
Mm.
fact, I saw that you are a creative writing teacher, right? So even my idea of creative writing is so different from. I don't understand the creative writing that is taught in our schools. You know, it's a completely different thing that we are talking about. So it's
So
so
you're also teaching writing, Shandana?
so I know I occasionally do writing workshops
Okay.
for, yeah. When I was younger, when I was very young, actually, I dropped out of college in my undergraduate degree program. At that time, I'm that old. At that time, there was, you know, the idea of studying creative writing was not as possible as it is now. Programs ही नहीं थे. And so I dropped out of college and I told my father I wanted to be a writer. He said, okay. But, you know, I had to do something. So I then was employed as a teacher. So I worked as a teacher for 4 years while I.
Okay. That's what you're currently doing also.
So I'm not a teacher. I'm not sure. I occasionally teach creative writing workshops.
Okay. And when in your creative writing workshops, the students or the writers that you meet, what would you tell them about writing? How would you sort of open up the writing space for them? Like, what are your key things that a simple Google search or random blogs will not tell us? I mean, sure, we know, yeah, if you read a lot, you write better, or things like that, or if you have good exposure, etc. If you travel, you learn to, meet people, etc. But what are your favorite pet things? This is only something that I have experienced and I tell the writers in my workshop.
So I try not to tell the writers in my workshop much. I try to listen. I think the most valuable thing for a young writer is the knowledge that they are not alone, that there is a community out there, that it's very widely distributed, but it exists. Once in a while, it's nice to know that there is somebody else out there who, you can think of it as a network of stars that you don't see at night. So I think giving a young writer that knowledge that they are not alone in what they're doing and, whatever they're moving towards, that is what a teacher should do. And what that does is it gives them confidence, right? And I also tell them that to understand that writing is a lifelong apprenticeship. So it is one of the rare things in which you get better as you age. And these days, that is a particularly important lesson because there is a cult of youth where people are feeling pressure to perform or to deliver when they are young. And if I haven't done this by this time, then I'm a failure, etc., etc. And I think that might be something that they should steer away from. You will get better. This is not one of those professions or one of those callings where your best work comes at the beginning of your life. Actually, it doesn't.
I think you make a very important point that we're so success driven and results driven that we neglect the ideation process, and that's what you're calling the writers to focus on.
So I don't even know if I would use success as the word. I think the word I want to use is visibility. We're so visibility driven. So I would wonder if there is any truth to the idea that young writers these days want to be seen as writers rather than actually be writers. Because this is something else that I tell young writers that I work with, that this is a horrible way to spend your life. I mean, don't do it unless there's really nothing else you'd rather do. Quite apart from the fact that you will probably never make a living from it. It is intensely hard. And it's very lonely, I think, because to really immerse yourself in the story means you disconnect yourself from the real world. And if you have a family, if you have, loved ones, then that can be quite awkward at times. Aapko kuch bol raha hai, aapko sunai nahi de raha, and then, it turns out to have been something really important. So, yeah, I don't think that you can teach young people creative writing. I think you can teach them, you can propagate values, which is the whole point of an education in creative writing, right? Literary values kya hai?
So Shandana, what's your writing process like? From the stage of ideation to writing, how do you edit? Do you show your work to a family member or to an editor? So just walk us through that.
process has changed a lot over the years, depending on what stage of life I was at. My first novel I wrote when I was pregnant with my second child. So I actually wrote it in a car parked outside his nursery, writing on the wheel with a big tummy. My second book, I think I wrote a few hundred words a day when the kids asleep, and then I would read them the words the next day to see how it went down. My third book I wrote very quickly, and yeah, it's different for every book. Every story has to find its own form. This is what I tell people that I work with, that every story has its own form, so you can't be bound by ideas of form from the beginning, and the form will change and it will mutate, and
So
process is also different.
yeah.
But you can do one thing, and that the one thing that you should do is you should try to develop a daily practice. So write a few hundred words a day. Just make yourself write a few hundred words a day, and don't think about it. Just force yourself to do it. And it might be the worst thing anyone has ever written. People might look at it and fall unconscious that it could be that bad, but you have to hit that word count, because it's like any kind of exercise. If you want to develop certain sets of muscles, you do those reps or whatever you call them. You go walking if you want to build stamina. So you've got to build the endurance of it. Just
And then once you have something outside the house, would you show it to anyone? The role of the editor, I'm trying to get to the role of the editor.
Yeah.
Another
So
pair
the
of
first
eyes.
editor, the first editor you should show it to is yourself. You write something. When you think that you have a workable first draft, you put it away. Put it away for a period of time, and time enough for you to not be in love with it anymore. Divorce your feelings, then read it again. So, and then edit it, right? So then once you have that second draft, which your inner editor has had a go at, then show it to, if you're lucky enough to have a first reader, which is somebody that you trust, then show it to them, right? And then once they've said, "Haan, chalega, okay, theek hai," then you can start the process of trying to find someone to actually publish your work. This is if you follow the traditional, I want to have a book, I want to publish a book, or I want one of my books published. There are many other options now, of course, so I can only speak to this kind of writing.
Can you sort of give some examples for our viewers? What else? What other options are there?
People publish online. They publish blogs. They do this or that. So it depends on what you're doing.
And what about the
self-publish as well?
Yeah. And speaking of that, what about the publishing scene, especially in Pakistan, and what's the way to go about it, or what options do young writers have, especially writing in English?
Okay, so the publishing, English language publishing in Pakistan has begun to open up since the last few years, since about 2016. And we have begun to see the emergence of small independent presses, and we've seen a rise in the presence of older English language publishers, like Readings in Lahore, for example. It's a bookstore. They have a publishing imprint. Liberty Books, which is a big bookstore chain that's more dominant in Karachi, has started its own publishing imprint. The woman who used to run OUP has started her own publishing house. There's many others now. So there are options that you have to be published in the English language in Pakistan that there weren't when I was a young writer. The challenges that you will face getting published in Pakistan is realizing that the market for English language writing is very, very small. It is unsustainable, really. So if you go into wanting to be published with the idea that your book will become a bestseller and you're writing English language fiction, then in Pakistan, then you should probably, sit down and have a quiet word with yourself, and then make your peace with it, and go ahead, because some of us just need to do it, and that's fine. But get your expectations aligned with reality. After you had that internal conversation, then you start. So traditionally in the rest of the world, you need an agent right? And then what an agent does is an agent is someone who is wearing a kind of badge that allows them to access the gatekeepers who control publishing.
Right.
In Pakistan, we don't really need agents so far because our English language publishing scene is still evolving. So you can simply write a query letter and you can then start querying publishers. Young writers should really educate themselves on how to write a query letter. It's very easy. You just have to do a Google search, how to write an effective query letter. There are so many resources available on the internet, or as I like to call it to irritate my children, the interwebs, that you can learn pretty much anything about all kinds of publishing. So step one is educate yourself. Step two is nobody owes you anything. I mean, I ran a small press for a little while, and some of the query letters that I got, I mean, it was just, yeah, if I wasn't a writer and I they were coming from, I might have been irritated. As it was, I would think, I wish you had just Googled how to write a query letter. And it's like nobody, so here's a problem here. We don't respect books. Pakistan is an anti-intellectual culture. And it's a very interesting culture because on one hand, we have so much reverence for a text. And on the other hand, we have no reverence at all for text. So, and I think the story of our lives is going to be, how do we reconcile those two realities? Happiness for us is going to lie in bringing those two things closer to each other. But right now they are there. So it's a real problem because
interesting.
That lack of reverence for the process of writing, that lack of respect for publishing as a business contributes to a certain lack of etiquette